You've just heard one of the many nightmares this world hides. If stories like this keep you on the edge of your seat, then don't just listen, be part of the journey. Subscribe to Eclipse Horror Stories today. Every week, we bring you chilling true encounters, terrifying legends, and mysteries that will make you question what's waiting in the dark. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and step into the shadows with us. Because here, the horror never sleeps. Let's dive into the stories. Los Angeles, a city of dreams, lights, and endless movement. But beneath the glitz and glamour lies something darker. From late-night buses to eerie subway stations, from rideshare scams to encounters in the sky, real people have experienced moments of terror they'll never forget. Tonight, I'll share with you 6 true, chilling stories from the streets, stations, and skies of Los Angeles. These are the moments that turned ordinary commutes into nightmares. So sit back, dim the lights, and remember, the next time you travel, you may not be as safe as you think. That night in Los Angeles started out like any other, but it quickly turned into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I had just left a date in Hollywood. Things had been going well at first, but near the end of the night, my date made a comment so ignorant and off-putting that I couldn't bring myself to invite her back to my place. Annoyed and disappointed, I walked away and decided to catch the dreaded late-night bus home. So there I was, a little buzzed from the drinks and full of self-righteousness, convincing myself I had done the right thing. About 5 minutes into the ride, regret began to creep in. I sat slouched in the middle section of the bus, replaying my choices in my head, when 2 loud punks started throwing insults my way. They were the only other passengers besides me. One was tall and skinny with a spiky red mohawk. The other was heavy-set with half-dyed green and black hair. Their voices were full of profanity as they called me every name they could think of. At first, I tried to ignore them, but eventually I snapped. I turned around and told them exactly where they could shove their poop. That was a mistake. The 2 of them began rattling my seat, slapping the windows, and laughing like hyenas. I decided to move closer to the driver, a middle-aged woman I vaguely recognized. She glanced at me through the rearview mirror, shaking her head as if to say, "You know better than to provoke them." But the punks followed me, their insults turning into threats. One of them leaned forward and hissed, "I'll cut you, pretty boy. I'll cut you real good." I froze, realizing things were escalating fast. I tried to move again, but one of them shoved me back into my seat. The next shove was harder. My head cracked loudly against the seat back. Dizzy and furious, I considered fighting back, but deep down I knew I'd lose. That's when it got worse. The bigger one pulled out a hunting knife, the metal glinting under the bus lights. He waved it toward the driver and me, snarling that he'd make us both regret being alive. Before I could even react, the driver did something reckless, but brilliant. She suddenly slammed the bus into the concrete barrier along Sunset Boulevard. The bus lurched forward violently, sending the big punk flying down the aisle. His knife flew out of his hand, clattering across the floor. The crash threw him so hard into the dashboard that I heard the sickening crack of bone. The bus screeched to a stop. The driver leapt from her seat, kicked open the doors, and yelled for someone outside to call the police. Then, without hesitation, she tackled the second punk to the ground and literally sat on him, pinning him in place. I stumbled forward, dazed, but helped restrain the first guy, who was out cold from the crash. Minutes later, LAPD officers arrived and took the punks into custody. I later found out that the driver had intentionally crashed the bus to stop them from stabbing either of us. It was reckless, sure, but it probably saved my life. I still see her sometimes. Story 2. The fake rideshare in Los Angeles. Toward the end of last summer, my fiancé and I had just finished a long day in Los Angeles. We had been downtown for dinner after an event, and instead of driving, we decided to take a cab back to our hotel near Santa Monica. The night had been perfect, good food, good company, and the kind of carefree laughter you only get on vacation. But things quickly turned from lighthearted to terrifying. We'd been told by the hotel concierge to always use an official rideshare or a yellow cab, and we thought we were being cautious. At the pickup spot near Pershing Square, a man pulled up in what looked like a legitimate taxi. He had a laminated badge hanging from the mirror, a meter on the dash, and a wide smile. Everything seemed fine. We checked the plates against the app he showed us and got in. I sat in the back with my fiancé, and at first, the ride was casual. The driver made small talk in broken English, telling us he had lived in LA for years. But about 10 minutes into the ride, I noticed something strange. A white van slid into the lane behind us, headlights off, following closely. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but when it kept tailing us through multiple turns, I whispered to my fiancé, "That van's following us." She leaned forward and asked the driver about it. He just laughed and said, "Don't worry, happens a lot here. People don't like cops noticing them." That made zero sense. The van flashed its brights, and the driver's demeanor shifted. He looked at me through the rearview mirror, his face suddenly tense. "We have to stop," he muttered. My fiancée's voice cracked as she snapped, "No, don't stop. Keep driving." But the driver ignored her. He pulled the taxi to the side of the road near an empty industrial street, just outside downtown. My heart sank. The van pulled up right behind us. Two masked men jumped out, one holding a gun. The driver stepped out calmly, hands up, as if he was already in on it. Within seconds, the gunmen were yanking open our back doors. "Out, both of you," one barked, tapping the window with the barrel of his pistol. My fiancé screamed. They shoved me against the car and patted me down, taking my wallet, phone, and watch. One of them ripped her purse from her hands. Thankfully, they didn't touch her physically, but they demanded we strip down to our underwear. Humiliated, we obeyed. The men laughed at us, snatched up our clothes, and tossed them into the van. Then one of them slid into the driver's seat of the taxi, and the others piled back into the van. Within seconds, both vehicles sped off, leaving us half-naked and stranded in the middle of Los Angeles. The night air was colder than I expected. We walked for nearly 2 hours before finding a gas station, barefoot and shivering, my fiancé wrapped in an old blanket we found in the street. The clerk inside called the police for us. When the LAPD finally arrived, they seemed disinterested. They took our statements but shrugged when we begged them to look for the cab driver. They even joked among themselves, which only made my fiancé cry harder. The worst part came the next night. We were at a small restaurant near our hotel when I heard a familiar laugh. I looked over and saw him, the same driver, sitting at a table with 3 other men, drinks in hand, celebrating. When he noticed me, his smile faltered. His eyes went wide with panic, and he immediately slipped out the back. His friends stayed, feigning ignorance when I confronted them. One even pointed at my shirt and sneered, "Nice clothes." That's when I knew for certain. The whole thing had been a scam orchestrated by 4 crooks preying on tourists. To this day, I can't take a cab in Los Angeles without thinking about how easily we could have disappeared that night. Story 3. The knife on the LA Metro bus. When I was in college in Los Angeles, I used to take the Metro bus downtown all the time. It wasn't glamorous. It smelled like sweat and cheap food, and the late-night rides were always full of strange characters. Most nights, it was just uncomfortable, but one ride nearly turned deadly. I was sitting toward the middle of the bus heading down Wilshire, half distracted by my phone. Next to me sat a rough-looking guy in a worn jacket, checking his watch and muttering under his breath. He looked irritated, but not dangerous. A few seats ahead, though, was someone who immediately set off alarm bells. He was pale, sweaty, twitching, and scratching at his neck. In the middle of summer, he wore a heavy black coat. His eyes darted around the bus, scanning everyone like he was hunting. I watched in unease as his stare locked onto an elderly man sitting by the window. Slowly, he got up, stumbled across the aisle, and leaned down over the old man. I couldn't hear what he whispered, but then his hand slipped into his pocket, and out came a switchblade. My heart raced. Instinctively, I started to stand, ready to do something, anything. That's when the guy next to me grabbed my arm and yanked me back down. "Don't be a hero," he hissed. For a second, I thought he was threatening me too. My chest tightened. Was I surrounded by two attackers? But then he jumped to his feet, pulled something from under his jacket, and shouted, "Police! Drop the knife." It turned out the rough-looking guy was actually an off-duty LAPD officer. The twitchy man spun around, startled, knife raised. At that exact moment, the bus driver slammed the brakes. The officer lost his footing, stumbled forward, and, horrifyingly, fell right onto the blade. The whole bus gasped in unison as the knife drove into his arm. Blood soaked through his sleeve. The drugged-out man froze, staring at his hands like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. Then he lunged forward, trying to grab the knife again. Before I could react, the elderly passenger, the one who had been targeted, suddenly stood, grabbed the attacker's arm, and twisted it into a lock. The old man moved with surprising skill, like he'd been trained. The addict dropped to the floor with a yell, and a couple of other passengers jumped in to help restrain him. I rushed to the officer, who was clutching his bleeding arm, the knife still lodged in his bicep. I stupidly reached for it, but he barked, "Don't pull it out." Moments later, the bus screeched to a stop at a station. On-duty police swarmed aboard. They hauled the attacker away in cuffs while paramedics rushed to help the wounded officer. Only later did I learn that the old man was a retired Vietnam veteran. He wasn't some action movie hero, just an aging veteran who still remembered how to take down a threat. That night, the bus ride back to my apartment felt different. I wasn't the one attacked, but witnessing it, being that close, left me shaken. 4 months after, every time I stepped onto an LA bus, I couldn't stop scanning every passenger, waiting for the next twitchy stranger to pull out a knife. Story 4: The Creepy Flight from LAX. Last year, I booked a 15-hour flight from LAX to Tokyo to visit my partner. I've always hated flying. Being trapped in the air that long makes me anxious. To calm my nerves, I upgraded to business class, hoping the extra space would help. At the gate, I took a sedative to relax and boarded early. By the time the plane took off, I had already drifted into a groggy sleep. When I woke up a few hours later, I noticed the seat beside me was empty. I felt relieved. Maybe I'd lucked out with no seatmate. But a few minutes later, someone dropped heavily into the seat, nearly spilling my sparkling water. I turned and froze. The person was leaning in close, almost too close. They had bleached blonde hair, a scruffy ginger beard, heavy eyeliner, and stretched piercings in both ears. Their pupils were wide, their breath sour, and they smelled like they hadn't showered in weeks. "I'm Kieran," they slurred, shoving their hand awkwardly toward my lap, as if expecting me to shake it. I forced a polite smile and introduced myself. From that moment, they would not stop talking. Kieran rambled about being both an MMA promoter and a playwright. He said he was going to change the world with his art and sports empire. His voice was loud, his gestures exaggerated, and his smell overpowering. After nearly an hour of this, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Not because I needed to, but because I desperately needed a break. When I stepped out, Kieran was waiting right outside the door. He leaned forward, inhaled deeply through his nose, and smirked. The way he looked at me made my skin crawl. Then he placed an arm across the doorway, blocking me. "You should join me in there," he whispered. "Mile High Club. You and me." I laughed nervously and shook my head. But instead of backing off, he pressed closer, his body practically pinning me to the wall. Then he asked, "Wait, is the reason you don't want me because I'm non-binary? Are you prejudiced?" My jaw dropped. I held up my hand, showing my engagement ring. "No," I said firmly. "It's because I have a fiancé, and I'm not interested." His face darkened. He clenched his fist against the wall beside me, not hard enough to draw attention, but enough to send a clear message. "I'm stronger than you, and I know it." I ducked under his arm and hurried back to my seat, signaling discreetly to a flight attendant with a pleading look. A few minutes later, the attendant came by, asking if everything was okay. I nodded, but asked for another drink just so he'd return again later. Kieran sat beside me, muttering under his breath. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but soon I realized he was whispering some of the most violent threats I'd ever heard. They weren't directed at me by name, but they were disgusting, hateful, and constant. For the next 10 hours, trapped by the window, I sat frozen while Kieran whispered filth, occasionally stopping when the attendant walked by. When we landed in Tokyo, Kieran didn't budge. He stayed seated, muttering until a flight attendant finally forced him to stand and exit. Only then did I tell the crew what had happened. They scolded me for not reporting it sooner, urging me to tell Japanese authorities. But I was drained. I just wanted to leave. Even now, when I think about that flight, my chest tightens. It wasn't the direct threats that got to me. It was being trapped, powerless, forced to endure hours of whispered cruelty. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't the violence itself. It's the feeling that no matter what you do, you're stuck with it. Story 5: The Cruise from Long Beach. I was 16 when my parents took my sister and me on a cruise leaving from Long Beach, California. At first, I thought it would be boring. Just a bunch of families, old people, and endless buffets. But on the very first day, during the muster drill, I saw her. She was the kind of girl every moody, alternative teenage boy dreamed about back then. Black clothes, heavy eyeliner, combat boots, and this mysterious aura like she didn't care about anything. To me, she looked like the embodiment of every rock band poster I'd ever taped to my bedroom wall. Her name was Sierra. I was hooked instantly. Later that evening, I spotted her in the arcade, leaning against a wall, smoking near a broken machine, glaring at the little kids playing House of the Dead. My sister caught me staring and whispered, "Don't even think about it. She's bad news." But of course, I didn't listen. I introduced myself, and Sierra smirked. "I'm a misanthrope," she said flatly. "That means I hate everyone." I laughed nervously and said, "Yeah, me too." That was the start of a whirlwind I didn't know how to escape. At first, Sierra was just edgy. She mocked the cruise, the people, even me, but in a way that made me want her attention. But soon she started pulling me into things I wasn't comfortable with. She knew the ship inside and out, pointing out spots where security cameras didn't reach. She showed me how to jimmy a prize machine to spill out tickets. When I hesitated, she mocked me until I gave in. The next day, she upped the game. I watched in shock as she slipped through a crowd in the atrium, bumping into people and, without them noticing, sliding wallets and jewelry into her pockets. Later, she pulled me into a corner and dumped a pile of stolen purses onto the floor. "If you tell anyone," she whispered, her eyes glinting, "I'll I'll tell them you forced me to do it, and they'll believe me. That's when I realized Sierra wasn't just troubled, she was dangerous. Still, she wouldn't leave me alone. She found me by the pool, in the arcade, even at the buffet. And every time, she wanted me to do something worse. Vandalize a vending machine, lie to adults, or watch her torment younger kids with twisted stories about people falling overboard. The final straw came at the water park. Sierra showed up in a black bikini, pulling a box of thumbtacks from her top. She grinned and said she wanted to scatter them down the water slide. Kids, including my own sister, were playing there. I snatched the box from her and hurled it overboard into the ocean. I braced for her fury, but instead she smiled. "You passed my test," she whispered. "Maybe tonight you'll finally earn your reward." That night, she told me to meet her on a dark deck near the water park. Against my better judgment, I went. When I arrived, she was waiting, eyes blazing with rage. "You humiliated me," she spat. "You think you're better than me? I know where your sister's cabin is. I could ruin her life. Unless..." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Unless you prove yourself. Jump. Right now. Into the ocean." I froze. "What?" "Climb over the railing," she hissed. "Do it, or your sister pays the price." I laughed in disbelief. "You're insane. That would kill me." Her face twisted with fury. She lunged, shoving me hard against the railing. I barely caught myself. Then she grabbed between my legs and squeezed viciously, snarling, "Get over the edge." Panicked, I grabbed the nearest thing I could. One of those orange life rings bolted to the wall. I swung it with all my strength, smashing it against her head. The plastic cracked on impact, and Sierra crumpled to the deck. I immediately shouted for help. Crew members rushed over, and soon security had her restrained. They later told me she wasn't on the passenger list. They believed she was a stowaway, maybe even the child of a crew member. I never saw her again. To this day, I still think about Sierra, the girl who started as my teenage dream but ended as my nightmare. The girl who tried to shove me overboard in the middle of the Pacific. Story 6: The Stalker in the LA Metro. This happened more than 10 years ago, but I still think about it every time I take the Los Angeles Metro late at night. I had been out in Hollywood with some friends and was heading back to a friend's apartment near North Hollywood. It was close to midnight, and I decided to take the red line from Hollywood/Vine Station. Normally, I wasn't nervous. I'd taken the subway plenty of times, but that night was different. The station was almost empty when I walked in. A cold drizzle had started outside, and the streets above were quiet. I remember seeing a homeless man huddled near the entrance, muttering to himself. I ignored him and started down the long stairwell to the platform. About 20 steps in, I heard something behind me. Footstep. I paused. The footsteps stopped. I started again. So did they. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just another passenger. But when I stopped suddenly, the sound stopped too, as if the person was deliberately matching my pace. The air in that stairwell felt heavy. My heart pounded as I gripped my keys between my fingers like a weapon. Then came the sound that chilled me more than the footsteps, a slow, eerie whistle. I quickened my pace. The footsteps behind me sped up too. I didn't dare look back. I just hurried down the spiral staircase, whispering to myself, "Don't panic. Just make it to the platform." Finally, I stepped off the last stair, nearly stumbling onto the empty platform. My relief lasted 2 seconds before the footsteps came rushing down after me. That's when a man suddenly stepped out from behind a vending machine. He was middle-aged, dressed in a neat business suit, carrying a briefcase. "You okay?" he asked kindly. shakily and told him someone had been following me. He chuckled, trying to reassure me. Probably just another commuter. Stick with me, you'll be fine. Almost on cue, a figure emerged from the stairwell. It was a girl, maybe my age, maybe younger. Her hair was plastered to her head with sweat or rain, her clothes filthy, her eyes wild and frantic. She froze when she saw us. The moment her gaze landed on the businessman, her entire face contorted with fear. She let out a small, terrified scream, spun on her heel, and bolted back up the stairs. I stood there stunned. The businessman smirked faintly, then said, "Looks like you're safe now." When the train arrived, he insisted we ride together since his stop was also North Hollywood. He even walked me close to my friend's apartment afterward, which at the time felt reassuring. But later, as I replayed everything in my head, one detail wouldn't leave me alone. That girl wasn't afraid of me. She wasn't even startled by being caught following someone. She was terrified of him. She looked at him like she recognized him, like he was worse than whatever she had planned for me. To this day, I don't know who that man really was. Maybe he saved me, or maybe I was standing beside someone far more dangerous than the stalker who fled. And those were 6 true, scary Los Angeles public transportation stories. From bus drivers who became heroes, to cab rides that turned into nightmares, to strangers on flights and trains who were far more dangerous than they first seemed. One thing is clear: danger can hide in plain sight. Which of these stories shook you the most? Have you ever had a creepy or dangerous experience while traveling? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more chilling true stories every week. Until next time, stay safe, because sometimes the scariest part of a journey isn't the destination, it's the people you meet along the way.